Paul Benowitz lived in Albuquerque, next to Kirtland Air Force Base, which
Did this
was and
UFO
is a center of a lot
enthusiast
of
go
secret
too far?
weapons and weapons systems and aircraft research. And so he was uniquely positioned to see what was going on the base because he lived on a hill, his house is still there, overlooking the entire base. And he could see things, especially late at night when they were doing testing. And they didn't figure anybody was up at that hour, but Paul Benowitz was. He had a degree, I think a master's in electrical engineering.
And so he began intercepting radio communications, firstly involving a Manzano nuclear facility there in New Mexico. And so he was able to get some of this information about UFOs, monitoring this facility, spying on that. And he was getting some really interesting communications that he felt were extraterrestrial in origin. And he learned a lot of things about the extraterrestrials or whoever it was in the UFOs that were piloting them, communicating amongst themselves and communicating with actors on the ground.
So he foolishly and naively alerted the U.S. government to this fact. In fact, he wrote letters to President Ronald Reagan after 1981, several, I think, alerted the people of Kirtland.
Well, he started seeing and then filming with a 8mm camera, I believe, these objects lighting up, raising up in the air, going off behind a mountain and dropping down behind the mountain. And he said he thought that these were some sort of UFOs with aliens piloting them. And he wanted the Air Force to know this, as if somehow they wouldn't know that this was going on their own base. He also said he saw people walking around them with flashlights before they took off, which is another weird thing.
He essentially opened his entire books up to them and said, I've been seeing these objects, I've been filming them, there are these coded transmissions coming from them, and I've recorded them, and I'm starting to decipher them. So for people working at the base who are enlisted to take part in these controversial classified programs, Benowitz was immediately perceived as a potential threat to national security because he was digging into something that was highly controversial but also deeply secret as well. So he'd really tipped the scales against himself. And that's when the people at the base began saying to him, well, what is it that you've found? Maybe we can help you a little bit. But this was really done to try and convince him to open up and tell them everything he knew. That would then allow them to see how much damage had been done and how much damage control they then had to put into place. So looking back at it, we could say he was almost his own worst enemy by revealing what it was that he'd found.
So this was something, him being a loyal American citizen, he went to the Air Force Office of Special Investigations and he began working with one of their intelligence officials, Richard Doty. And Doty was basically having Benowitz debriefed, and actually they came up with some funding for Benowitz to continue to do this research because they were interested in finding out what it was Benowitz had learned.
Benowitz was fully aware that he was being watched, but he took it as almost like a double-edged sword, that he knew that he was being watched and he wasn't too happy about that. But on the other hand, he realised that if he was being watched, then clearly he was on the right path. So he tried to juggle things where he knew some of these people were somewhat hostile to him, but others were actually trying to help him by giving him information. So it was a case of having to work with one and having to put up with the other.
So Air Force Office of Special Investigations was trying to work out what's going on, but eventually they were ordered to basically take Benowitz out, and the way they did it was to work with the Greys, because they did have agreements with the Grey extraterrestrials, and Grey extraterrestrials began messing with Benowitz, and eventually he had a nervous breakdown, and that's when his involvement in this whole field came to an end.
Paul Benowitz was led to believe that there was a secret underground base located near Dulce, New Mexico. He began flying there in his plane to check out the area.
Eventually what happened was they began to mess with him, and some extraterrestrials, a group of grey extraterrestrials that were working with the military in the Dulce base. Benowitz's radio equipment had been able to intercept the communications between the extraterrestrials and the human operators in the base, in the underground base. So Dulce becomes a point of focus for Benowitz, and he trains his equipment there, and he has some high-speed photographic equipment there as well, and he's actually able to photograph some of the ships, some of the UFOs going into the mesa, where you actually have a kind of vibrational shift in some of the craft.
And the more he dug into it, he found himself exposed to even more nightmarish stories, many of them coming from Dulce. For example, a lot of these insiders, whistleblowers if you like, claimed to him that all sorts of unspeakable experiments were being undertaken in the Dulce base. People were being used as guinea pigs, if you like, in bizarre genetic experiments, splicing alien and human DNA together and creating strange half-human, half-alien creatures. And reportedly there were hundreds and hundreds of people kept in the Dulce base in cages, you know, the people who go missing every year, that kind of thing.